Hello and welcome to the third and final episode of How Do You Answer for the Living Under Nazi Rule OCR History B unit. In this episode we are going to look at how do you answer an 18-mark question. In the previous videos we've looked at how do you answer a 7-mark and a 15-mark question. So now we're moving on to the third and final question on the Living Under Nazi Rule paper. So step one, exactly the same as the other two videos. What is the question asking you? Now the 18-mark question is a little bit different from the 7 and the 15-mark question, and it's different in a couple of ways. The 18-mark question will give you an overarching statement about a particular theme within the unit of Living Under Nazi Rule, and then it'll ask you, how far do you agree with this statement? You will also have a choice out of two 18-mark questions, of which you only need to answer one. You must only answer one. Answering two is a waste of time, and you're not going to get double the marks. So that's one difference, the fact that it's a choice of questions and you answer one. The other difference is that, as you can see with an example of the 18-mark question that's flashed up on the screen, it's not got any sources, it's not got any interpretations in there. So you need to have a look at the question that's in front of you and you need to identify, right, what is the focus of this particular knowledge question? In this instance, it's the idea that the Nazis did have a big impact on the lives of women. It's saying the Nazis had a big impact on the lives of women. Do you agree with this? Yes or no? Now, because the question is asking you how far do you agree, the answer that you give is therefore going to need to make a judgment, using your own knowledge to back up the reason why you are saying that. As I've said before, this is not a source or an interpretation question, it is purely a knowledge question. Therefore, this is where your retrieval practice from your revision will be required. This typically is the question that students who have revised effectively and done really well in their revision will do very well on this question, because it's really straightforward once you've done your revision. The hard part is just retrieving it from your long-term memory. But the more you practice doing that in your revision, the easier this will be. Once you've identified the focus of the question, now you need to come up with a plan. So if we've got the question at the top of the screen and you've identified the focus of it, your first sentence needs to be whether you agree or disagree with the statement. As you've read the question, you've probably started to think about it already in your head. Well, yes, I agree with that, or no, I disagree with that. Your first sentence just needs to tell the examiner whether you agree or disagree with the statement. The main bulk of your essay is going to consist of 4 paragraphs that explain why you agree or disagree with the statement, using relevant examples to support your explanations. Now, these explanation paragraphs must be organized in a certain way. They must have what we call an element of balance. What does that balance look like? Well, it could be any of the following combinations. You could say, right, here are 2 reasons that I agree, explain them away, and here are 2 reasons I disagree, explain them away. So you split right down the middle. Yes, here are 2 that I agree, 2 that I disagree. Or if you are more in favor of agreeing with the statement, you could go 3 examples that agree and 1 that disagrees. On the flip side, if you are more leaning towards the disagree side, you could go, here are 3 that disagree, here are 1, that agree, here are 3 that disagree. It's up to you which way you go down these. However, you must have at least 1 disagree or agree in your answer. Now, to help you with this balance, I find it's always best to start off with agreeing with the statement. The statement has given you something to talk about. Why not talk about that to begin with? They've said that the Nazis had a big impact on the lives of women. Start off by analysing an example that could support that, to explain why some people might have that judgment. Once you have finished your 4 paragraphs, you then need to write a despite judgment that weighs up your arguments and offers a firm conclusion. We'll talk about the despite judgment when we come to look at the example answers and the sentence starters for this. However, I strongly encourage all of my students not to rush through the main body of their essays, the 4 paragraphs, to get onto the conclusion, because the conclusion is only worth the 18th out of 18 marks. You can still get 17 marks from the 4 main paragraphs, so it is therefore not worth rushing anything to get onto the conclusion. But nevertheless, it's still important that you do try and get onto it, because it will tie your answer together and offer your judgment. In terms of planning then this then as if we were in an exam, what I would probably find easiest to do is to really quickly make a little table with agree on one side and disagree on the other side, draw a line down the middle, and then bullet point some examples that I could use to support or disagree with this statement. On the board, are some examples then that you could use to agree with this statement. So you could talk about the fact that there's the marriage loan scheme in 1934, the fact that female enrollment at university was down to 10%, which shows that the Nazis did have a big impact on the lives of women, especially in education. The fact that marriages increase or divorce rates increase, the fact that there was a huge impact on the appearance of women in Nazi Germany due to things like the Women's Bureau. So these are all some examples that you could use to agree with the statement. What I'd like to do, pause the video, see if you can come up with some disagree statements. What evidence could you find in your work, your revision, your books, previous YouTube videos that actually would argue, no, it wasn't the Nazis that had the biggest impact on the lives of women, or that their impact was limited? Pause the video here and we'll talk about them in a few seconds. Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to have a little bit of a think about that. In terms of your disagree then, you could have any of the following. The fact that by 1939, births are decreasing again, showing that the Nazis' impact is very limited. You could talk about the fact that the number of women in industry, so factories and agricultural work, also increases significantly throughout the time period by 1939. This is not what the Nazis had intended, and it suggests to us actually, well, maybe the Second World War had a bigger impact on the lives of women than the Nazi policies themselves. Those are just some examples that you could use. I'm sure there are probably more, but as we're just planning at this stage, we don't need to have an absolute ton of examples. We just need 4 in total that we feel comfortable talking about. Once you have come up with your plan, now you need to put it down onto paper. So, how are you going to start off with this? Well, exactly the same as the previous videos, you are going to use the wording of the question to help you. In your introduction, you are going to tell me overall whether you agree or disagree with whatever the statement is. Once you have done your introduction, you are going to start off with your agree example, because that's what I was talking about in the previous slide, that it's best to agree to begin with, because then it shows the examiner you have considered the statement in question. So you are going to say something like, one reason I, and then I put the word qualifier in brackets, agree with the statement that, and then you repeat the wording of the question. What do I mean by that little thing in brackets there, that phrase in brackets, qualifier? Well, a qualifier tells the examiner to what extent you agree or disagree with something. It shows what we call nuance in your answers. Rather than just saying, one reason I agree, one reason I disagree, why don't you try and include a qualifier, because then it will open your answer up to more levels of analysis. If you just go black and white, agree or disagree, well, that's okay to some extent, but if you are able to kind of talk about that grey area, well, one reason I somewhat agree is it allows your answer to be stronger, because you are looking at the pros and cons even within the agree or disagree paragraph. So you could say something like, one reason I somewhat agree with the statement that the Nazis had a big impact on the lives of women is because of, and then this is where you are going to identify your relevant example. This was, and then this is where you are going to include some supporting detail, including things like facts, figures, definitions, statistics, anything that you have historically accurate to that example. Then you are going to need to explain why that example you have chosen actually answers the question. So this shows that, ... explain why that example tells us whether the Nazis did have a big impact on the lives of women. Then you are going to link it back to the question by saying, therefore, I agree with the statement that, ... So telling the examiner just at the end of your example why that evidence either agrees or disagrees. So linking it back to the original question. If you were to go straight down the middle with your balance, so if you're going to agree to disagree, you just do the same again for agree. Again, another reason I, and then qualifier, so somewhat, overwhelmingly, moderately agree with the statement, and you repeat the cycle. You identify a relevant example, you offer some supporting detail, you then have to explain how that supporting detail proves the point that you are making, and link it back. Once we've done our to agree, you then need to switch sides and go on to disagree. So actually, on the other hand, I also somewhat moderately, overwhelmingly disagree because of identify an example, then provide some supporting detail, then explain what that shows us, then link it back to the question. Same again for the second disagree, and then you come on to your conclusion. Now again, don't rush any of your paragraphs to get onto this conclusion. But below is an example of a sentence starter that you could use if you actually agree with the statement in question. So you could say, despite the fact that some people may disagree with the argument that the Nazis improved the lives of, or had an impact, on the lives of women because of factors such as, and then this is where you would summarize the factors that you've talked about, it is clear overall that the Nazis did have a big impact on the lives of women, meaning I agree with the statement because of, and then this is where you summarize your other examples. It's really difficult, this part of the answer. You can't just necessarily repeat what you said. You need to come down on a firm judgment and explain to the examiner why the agree side is better than the disagree side. Why is that evidence more compelling than the other evidence that you've put forward? Again, if you are disagreeing in your conclusion, you just swap that round. So you start off with the fact that despite the fact that some people may agree with the statement, blah, 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 overall, I disagree because of, so you just need to swap the which way round you talk about those. Once you have written your answer then, what can you expect in terms of how it will be marked? Well, on the right-hand side in the green box, you've got the different skills that we are looking for in your answers. You need to identify a relevant example. You need to offer some supporting detail. You need to explain how that example actually supports or agrees/disagrees with the question. And then you need to link it back to the statement. You've got the mark scheme as well at the bottom in grey. If you have a look at the mark scheme, if you just simply describe different examples. So if you just simply described what the marriage loan scheme was to me without actually telling me why that improved or did not improve or had an impact on the lives of women, you'd be looking at about 4 marks. If you fully explain one example, you'll get 7 to 9, 2 examples, 10 to 12, 3 examples, 13 to 15. To get 16 or 17 marks, you have to fully explain 4 examples, either 3 on one side or 3 on the other side, or 2 and 2. Again, there must be an element of balance there. And then the 18th mark is for that despite conclusion, what we call a clinching argument. On the left-hand side then, you've got an example answer, answer A. I would like you to pause the video and I would like you to read through the example answer, and I would like you to try and find where they meet each of these skills that are we are after in the green boxes on the right hand side. So where do they identify a way that the Nazis did or did not have a big impact on the lives of women? Where do they offer supporting detail? Where do they explain their answer? And then where do they link it back? Pause the video here and we'll talk about it in a few seconds time. Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to have a read through the example answer. If we start off with the first paragraph then, let's see if we can find where they identify a relevant example as to how the Nazis did have a big impact on the lives of women. Because they're starting off with the agree side. Their identified point is the fact that they are saying, well, actually the Nazis did have a big impact on the lives of women because they are trying to turn German women into traditional housewives who will raise the next generation of the Aryan race. That's a good start. At the moment, there are about 4 marks because they've identified a relevant example. Now what we need is some supporting detail about how the Nazis do that. Well, they talk about the marriage loan scheme. They define what the marriage loan scheme is. They include some statistics, the fact that the marriage loan scheme, the loan was reduced for every 25%, by 25%, for every child that the couple had. So this is the supporting detail that they've offered. That's great, but we're still not yet explaining why that had a big impact on the lives of women. They then go on to explain exactly how the marriage loan scheme did impact the lives of women. They say that it encouraged marriage, and this is shown in supporting details such as the fact that 772,000 women were getting married by 1939. But they then show some nuance by saying, well, actually, even though the number of marriages increases, which is a big impact on the lives of women, the number of births rises and then falls again by 1939. So this is where that qualifier comes in really handy, because they've said at the start, one reason I somewhat agree with the statement, and in their explanation, they've gone, well, yes, actually, this is how it does have an impact, but actually, no, on the other hand, this is how it does not have an impact. So they're saying in their link sentence, therefore, the Nazis did impact on the lives of women to some extent. So this is a good answer. This is nuanced. It's not just completely black or white, saying yes, no. It's kind of looking at both sides, even within the agree paragraph. So saying somewhat agree is a good example of how to use a qualifier. In the second example then, that they give in the second paragraph, they've now switched to the disagree side. Again, their qualifier is that they somewhat disagree. In terms of the identified point that they've made here, well, they're saying that the Second World War, not the Nazis, had a bigger impact on the lives of women. What supporting detail have they got to back that up? Well, they're talking about the fact that the war forced German women into the workplace to fill the labour gap left behind by the males. For example, the 4.9 and the 3.3 million women who are working in agriculture and industry. This is good examples of where your retrieval knowledge will come in very useful. Again, this is good, but they've not actually explained how the Second World War did have a big impact on the lives of women. Well, how is that an important impact? Well, it's saying, well, this is the first time throughout the 1930s that women are actually being told that they should go into the workplace, or they're encouraged to go into the workplace, and therefore it gives them an opportunity to do something that was previously forbidden, and it also proves that at this time they are now more than just seen by the Nazis as wives and mothers. So again, it's a good explanation. It's explaining why this example actually says, well, no, the Nazis didn't have a big impact on the lives of women, it was the Second World War. To tie it together, they link it back to the statement. Again, they've got the qualifier there at the start, so it shows a level of nuance, and this is a really good answer. In terms of where they would fit on our mark scheme, if this is all a student had written, we would obviously be looking for an introduction to start off with. We'd be looking for 2 more paragraphs agreeing or disagreeing, and we'd be looking for a despite judgment. But because they've done 2 fully explained examples, and I would say they're quite good examples, I would put this at about 12 marks. So you can see, actually, once you break it down in terms of identify a point, back it up with some supporting detail, explain how that actually answers the question and link it back, you can see how easily this slots onto the mark scheme. Okay, so like I said, about 12 marks. Hopefully you found this video useful. The 18 mark question is exactly the same as the 18 mark question in the crime and punishment topic, and it's also the same structure as the 20 mark question in the Elizabethan unit, despite the fact that there are slight differences in the mark there. The main thing to take away with the 18 mark question is that it comes down to your revision. You must practice as much as you can retrieval practice, where you force yourself to recall knowledge so that it embeds in your long-term memory. Please don't make the mistake that lots of GCSE students do, where they think for the Nazi Germany paper, well, I can wing the 7 mark and the 15 mark question because they give me a source or an interpretation, which isn't necessarily true, but they think that, and then I'll be fine for the 18 marker. The 18 marker really separates those students out who've worked incredibly hard with their revision and those who've maybe not done as much as they should. If you do have any further questions about the 18 mark question, come and talk to your class teacher and we'll be happy to sit down and talk to you about it. But other than that, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you found this useful. Please make sure to have a look through all of the content videos for the Living Under Nazi Rule topic, where I discuss each part of the unit and the themes in more detail. That will help you with your 18 mark questions, because that is the knowledge you will need for your 18 mark questions. Thank you very much for watching.